He issued a call for national unity at the outset of the coronavirus pandemic. So why is it that Emmanuel Macron has just lost his majority in parliament? Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. Welcome to the France 24 debate. 17 left-leaning dissidents within Macron's La République En Marche party breaking ranks and forming their own group at the National Assembly, leaving him one seat shy now of an outright majority. Now, because of the support of centrists, that's hardly expected to bring down the government, but it does chisel away at its ability to pursue reforms in the 2 years remaining before the next presidential poll. The questions are, why now? Contrast it, for instance, with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. She's riding high in the polls. Is this about Macron's crisis management in a nation that was caught out with too few masks, too few tests? Is it the too elitist label that's dogged the French president since he took office in 2017, the first time he'd ever run, by the way, for any public office? Or is it simply, well, the built-in fate of any French leader who enjoys outsized powers compared to those of his neighbors, and with that attracts all the blame under the terms of a republic crafted by General de Gaulle? Is this type of centralized authority compatible with what the French still want today? In the France 24 debate, we're looking at Emmanuel Macron's political standing at home, and joining us to talk about it, she's one of those 17 MPs who broke ranks. Joining us from the Loire Valley city of Tours, Sabine Thier. Your new voting bloc is called Ecologie, Démocratie, Solidarité. Ecology, Democracy, Solidarity. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Sticking with La République En Marche firmly is Jacques-Marie Lossian, also member of parliament representing the Paris suburbs. Thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon.
From Megève, near the
Thank you for inviting me.
From Megève, near the Swiss border, political strategist Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet. He is the president of MCBG Consulting. How are you?
Fine. Hello, Francois. Nice to hear from you.
Nice to see you on high there, up a mountain. And near the city of Nîmes in the south of France, Julian Jackson, professor of modern French history and head of the School of History at Queen Mary University, which is part of the University of London, and the author of De Gaulle, which has just recently been translated into French. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
The France 24 debate, where you could join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. The hashtag is F24debate. The announcement came on Tuesday from those 17 dissident members of parliament. Nicholas Rushworth has more.
Another headache for French President Emmanuel Macron. After 3 years in power and in the throes of dealing with the pandemic, he's losing support within his own party. 7 MPs are quitting to join a new group of 17 MPs in Parliament. It will be co-chaired by ecologist and left-leaning MP Mathieu Orphelin. Among the defectors is Cédric Villani, who recently failed in his bid to become the party's choice to run as Paris mayor. He and the others say Macron has not delivered.
Nous avons été élus pour apporter le progrès. Et quand on regarde en arrière, on voit que sur ces 3 années, nous n'avons pas eu l'ambition qu'il fallait sur certains dossiers, en particulier en matière de réduction des inégalités, en particulier en matière écologique.
The new group in the French Parliament is called Ecology, Democracy, Solidarity. Its creation means Macron now only has 288 MPs. That's 1 MP short of an absolute majority. He can, though, still count on the support of alliance partner, the centrist Modem party. Macron came to power in 2017, dynamiting the political landscape, hammering the traditional left and right parties with his own centrist cross-party message. However, he has suffered a string of defections in recent months by MPs frustrated by his tight grip on decision-making and by his pro-business policies. Political pressure on him comes with the second round of the nationwide municipal vote, suspended over COVID-19, due to take place when circumstances allow.
So Sabine Thier, why have you joined this new voting bloc?
Well, there are several reasons. My situation is a little bit special because I was since several months not attached to a political group, and this is a real difficult situation in the parliament. And when I saw there was another force to come, a force with one of my preoccupations like ecology, I agreed to join them to enforce, because I engaged for 3 reasons in politics. The first reason, the European affairs. The second reason was to enforce economy, and the third reason, ecology. Environment issues. And I think we had to do much more on this point. The crisis relieved a lot of issues we have to deal with.
Specifically, can you name one of those specific issues that was perhaps the last straw?
No, I think now in this crisis, it's really necessary to see the direction we want, to take, because we have a lot of plans now. There are recovery plans on the European level, recovery plans on the national level, and I want to make sure that the direction is a ecological direction, and we need a force in this parliament to enforce this point.
Do you feel betrayed by Emmanuel Macron?
No. And I want to underline, I'm not a troublemaker, and I don't want to be a troublemaker, but I want to be in a group who does proposals with all political groups. This was a promise from 2017 to say, if there is a good proposal from another political group, we can support it. But we didn't do it.
Jacques-Marie Le Sien, would you consider those who've left as, do you hear what Sabine is saying, and do you agree with it, or do you consider it as a backstabbing?
I know Sabine well. We both are in the same defense committee. First of all, I would like to point out that Emmanuel Macron has not lost his majority. The majority is huge, over 350 MPs, made of En Marche, Modem, and Agir. In fact, some have left last week or this week. Now the amount of MPs in the En Marche group is 288. Majority is at 289. And next week we will have one more, because one MP will be replaced by his deputy after the municipal election. So we don't have
how do you explain
lost the majority that supports.
Jacques-Marie Le Sien, how do you explain the fact that there's this new breakaway group? How do you explain it? Why is this happening?
So this group is in fact quite heterogeneous, because you have different MPs from different origins and different reasons. A few of them, for instance, at least 2/3 of them were using Emmanuel Macron's picture on their electoral campaign posts. As said, they are still supporting Emmanuel Macron. Second, some of them, like Sabine, were in the past excluded from the parliamentary group because they were not respecting the rules of a parliamentary group, but they still remain En Marche. I know Sabine is still En Marche, but because she refused to comply with some rules, she was excluded from the group, and it was the same for a few others. And you have other people who are obviously have their own individual political agenda, because they left the group 2 or 3 years ago. I think of Mathieu Orphelin, for instance, or Paula Forteza, and they are pursuing different objectives. This is my problem with that group. When you look at their program, they present a program that is 99% compatible with En Marche as of today. So I'm sure they will vote and support the government. That's why I don't understand why they have selected or chosen this moment to do it. I find it a little bit shifted. We have plenty of other things to do than just creating a new group.
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, listening to Jacques-Marie Lossian, it sounds a little like a storm in a teacup. Is this a big deal for Macron, though?
Yes, indeed, it is, because it's the president has lost its majority in the parliament, so it will be more complicated to get his plans passed in the parliament. He will have to negotiate with his allies, such as the MoDem, that's a centrist force led by François Bayrou. He will have to negotiate with this new group, and it won't be a given anymore. Each law that he wants to pass now has to go through these partners of the majority. So it's a huge blow, and it's always a bad thing. If you recall François Hollande's rule and what he did with his own political party and majority in the parliament, he lost it when it started to shift apart from when the left of the party started to shift apart from the larger group, and it happens a little bit like this now. We have the left of the majority that is leaving, shifting from the majority, from the main group, and it's always a bad sign, because you lose your momentum and you start negotiating and you lose ground in the parliament. The parliament is not very useful anymore. In France, we have a very centralized system, but when it starts to not be working anymore like it used to be at the beginning of the mandate, it's a bad sign.
A bad sign, you say. Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, was this just expected? Is this the lot of any French president? You mentioned there the same thing happened with François Hollande, where there was a dissident group that broke away towards the end of his mandate.
Yeah, it happens a lot, because the president, after 2 or 3 years, he has lost his novelty. The French people are really cruel regarding their kings, so to speak. They want them to be kings a lot. They love them at the beginning, and then they want to cut their heads very, very soon. I mean, like 2 years after they've been elected. And the parliament is really the first sign of somebody losing ground, of a president losing ground in the opinion in its own party. And this is even more important for Emmanuel Macron, since the prime minister has really taken a lot of power during this crisis. He's really the one that French people trust the most. And even the minister for the economy, Bruno Le Maire, who is not really charismatic, and I'm not insulting him, is not really, is not Martin Luther King. Is the second in the opinion of the French people that they like the most. So the first person in their liking would be Edouard Philippe. The second one would be the Minister for the Economy, Bruno Le Maire, and then after Bruno Le Maire only comes the president. So it's a problem, because Edouard Philippe has a lot more experience, politically speaking, than the president, and the majority he owns now is really his. Even if the left has of part of the majority has left, it's a new group. Because of that, also, I mean, the political shift is really going towards the prime minister.
So, Julian Jackson, this is the 9th voting bloc now in the French Parliament. As you heard Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet say, under the Constitution, the Parliament itself doesn't have the kind of power it does in Germany or the UK. But the fact that you're seeing this fragmentation, what does that tell you?
Well, to be honest, I don't think it's a very big deal. If you want to, much bigger deal for Emmanuel Macron was the Gilets jaunes crisis. I mean, you've got to remember that in the whole time, for example, that General de Gaulle, because you partly asked me because I'm a historian of that period, in the whole time that de Gaulle was in power, he never had an overall majority in parliament, except after 1968 for 1 year when there was a landslide. And so even when even this man who seemed completely dominant was having to negotiate in the first period with a centrist party called the Républicains Indépendants, which was the party of Giscard d'Estaing and so on. So I don't see it as a very big deal. And I think one important thing to notice is that, and again, I want to make a comparison with the past. What's remarkable about the moment that Emmanuel Macron came to power in 2017, and the moment that de Gaulle came to power and then created this new constitution in 1958, is that they were faced with the complete implosion, destruction of most of the rest of the political landscape. In the case of Macron, the Socialist Party was devastated. The Républicains were devastated by the crisis around François Fillon, etc. In 1958, the old SFIO, the party of Mollet, was destroyed. The centrist MRP didn't exist. So what you got in both cases was a completely new party emerging. De Gaulle, the party that emerged to support de Gaulle, did not exist 4 months before he came back to power. It was cobbled together as a result and after his election. And therefore, it was a party that didn't really have any identity except that it was there to support de Gaulle. And they used to call them the godillots, the foot soldiers, if you want, of the president. They were there for de Gaulle. Similarly, with Macron, La République En Marche did not exist 6 weeks, well, a month before he came to power. So by definition, this is not to criticize La République En Marche. By definition, the people who joined the party, just as the people who followed de Gaulle in 58, did have very different agendas. They weren't, it was by definition a heterogeneous movement. And so
you show in your book, Julian Jackson, that de Gaulle was influenced by all the political intrigue that had come before him. And he managed to get together left-wing Gaullists and right-wing Gaullists and keep them together. We saw at the outset of the coronavirus crisis an address by the French president where he said, for too long, we've neglected those who do essential work but don't earn enough. Has Macron been true to his promise to take the best of the left and the best of the right and govern with that?
Well, it's what all presidents want to try and do. De Gaulle wanted to do it. He wanted to take the left and the right. It's an old. We were told just a moment ago about the French have always a desire to kill their king after a little bit, and there's also a long a tradition in France which goes back to the Bonapartist idea of wanting to be above party, to link left and right. But it is very difficult to do because ultimately they are being pulled in different directions. And it happened, de Gaulle wanted to be above party, but he found himself actually leading a party, and Macron would like to be above party. And I think this is, you raised the question about the complexity of being a president of the Fifth Republic. And I think that's really very, very important. It's an almost impossible job for anyone, including de Gaulle. By 1968, it wasn't working so well for de Gaulle because you are so exposed and you are the lightning conductor for all the frustrations and problems that the French have. And sometimes the prime minister can act as they call a fusible, as a sort of, can take some of that, but it's very, very difficult. And what Macron and de Gaulle both share, and what has been a problem for both of them, is this idea that they will speak to the country over what the French call les corps intermédiaires, over the syndicats, the head of the institutions, yes. And the problem with that is if you try to, and Macron was very explicitly at the beginning tried to do that. He wanted to have a personal relationship with the French, which de Gaulle wanted. But the problem with that is that when that goes wrong, you find yourself very, very alone.
Sabine Thier, when you ran for to be a member of parliament under the label of Emmanuel Macron's party, where your eyes were wide open, right? You knew this could happen.
No, it was my first time I engaged in politics. And it's a really difficult job. But I want to have a reaction for what I heard just before. It's really curious. Like the focus is only on the president. You said the president lost his majority, but you don't speak about the parliament, about the parliamentarians. And I think this is a real problem in France. There is, yes, the president speaks to the people, but normally the representatives of the people are the parliamentarians. And I think we know now a better cooperation between political groups and to show to our electors that are real discussion in the parliament and that we are a force. And the government has to discuss with us all.
Sabine Thier, tell us about the timing, because it's right in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic. We're still in lockdown, even if it has been eased since May the 11th. Why make this announcement now when it's supposed to be this moment of national unity?
I think there is never a good moment, a good situation, but I think it was necessary. It was necessary to do it now because we have to take a lot of decisions. We have to take a lot of investments. There are recovery plans, national recovery plans, and European recovery plans, and I think it's necessary to make sure how we will employ this the money we need for the economy, and to make sure this ecologic direction, but also to make sure that we don't opposite economy and ecology.
When it comes to how crisis management is going in the French government, the Sunday newspaper, Le Journal du Dimanche, has a tracking poll that it has, and we see it's kind of a seesaw, and it reflects what we heard earlier from Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, and that is that the prime minister is fairly popular, and Emmanuel Macron less so. Your thoughts, Jacques-Marie Le Sion, on the fact that there's been a lot of criticism of the government during this crisis?
We have a special problem in France because we have a sort of two-head executive, the president and the prime minister, which of course is not the same in classical democracies. So it means that through the media, the informations and all these things, you have journalists, for instance, who are always scrutinizing the words and the sentences of both Macron and Philippe. And when words are different, and words are different because they have two different personalities, they are believing that something has happened between Macron and Philippe. And this probably does not help. Because if you are in UK, in Germany, in Italy or Spain, there is only one head of the executive. Angela Merkel, for instance, speaks only for her sake. In France, you have the president that is at a certain level, may I say, a strategical level. And then you have also the prime minister who is at tactical implementation level. And they may differ in expressing a few things. And every time they have different words, you have journalists who are criticizing and say they are not aligned. This may create sometimes a confusion. A second point is most of our education in France is to create individuals who have a highly developed sense of criticism. And I'm always very curious to see that French are ranked number one to criticize themselves, while in many other countries, people are totally different. And this continues to happen. The French government has done a lot of things to support the economy, to fight the virus. Can you imagine that we have transferred almost 700 people from hospital in the east of France to other regions to face the virus. We have created unemployment special funds for most of the enterprises. So we are trying to maintain the economy. Nevertheless, people are not happy. They are asking for more. And this is the challenge we have. We are now.
Let me bring in Sabinti on this, because you're German-borns. How do you explain the fact that Angela Merkel's popularity ratings are so much higher than Emmanuel Macron's in this crisis?
I think Angela Merkel is really pragmatic, and she tries not she tries to speak in not in a dramatical way, and she is a scientific and she's a politician and a scientific, and I think this both sides is a point of I don't know the word in English. Confiance.
Confidence, yeah.
Confidence, and I think it's and in Germany there is a tradition of cooperation between political groups. They are not so in opposition like in France. You always search a kind of compromise in German, and this crisis shows the inconvenience, but also the advantages of centralism and federalism. And I think it will be interesting to have a closer look to this.
Julian Jackson?
Well, actually, I want to make a point which has sort of already been made, but I just it's worth reiterating. The point was made about the almost structural built-in conflict that the French system creates between the prime minister and the president. And it's absolutely right that Edouard Philippe has been getting very good ratings. He's seemed calm, he seemed competent, and so on. But in the whole history of the Fifth Republic, going back to de Gaulle and Pompidou, then between Pompidou and Chaban-Delmas, between Giscard d'Estaing and Chirac, I won't go on, the history lesson, but it is an institutional, you might say, dysfunction, because obviously the president wants their prime minister to do well, but they don't want their prime minister to do too well, because if their prime minister does too well, they start to get all the popularity. And in the case of Mitterrand, there were terrible problems, for example, between him and Michel Rocard. So I think it's a very good point and a very interesting one, but it's certainly not unique to the Macron presidency. It's built in almost to the French system as de Gaulle.
Let me bring in Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet here. Philippe, is this just an institutional problem that any French president would have? But when you look back at the last 2 months of this crisis, do you say to yourself, well, this stuff Macron could have done differently?
Yes, it's partly an institutional problem. Sarkozy had the same problem with François Fillon as prime minister. Hollande obviously had the same problem with Manuel Valls, and they all have had the same problem. All the presidents, the point where the situation is really different, and we have to face it, is that the crisis is unprecedented. I mean, no president ever recently had to face such a crisis. And Macron made a lot of mistakes. And the main mistake he made was to believe that he was someone outside of himself. He tried to be Clemenceau, he tried to be de Gaulle, he tried to be many things. And the only thing that people expected is for him to be Emmanuel Macron. They elected someone who could be a young guy, young president that would push the technostructure, the civil servants to their limits, so that they would perform better.
So and tell me on this point.
Yes.
Tell me if you agree with me. He's somebody who makes a lot of PR mistakes, but then he's often pretty good at rebounding, at catching up afterwards.
Yes, lots of time he was good at doing that. During the Yellow Vest crisis, for instance, he invented the Great Debate, and suddenly all the TVs went from covering 24/7 the Yellow Vest movement to covering 24/7 his own agenda as a president. And the big debate, he would talk to elected officials in all France, on all the towns in France, in order to spread the message. This was brilliant. But this time, he seems to be unable to rebound, because he's looking for models that are not really functional for this period, for this time. There is a good way to say it, is that the president is living in a dream, the dream that he would be de Gaulle or Clemenceau, the dream that France would be at war. This is dream. We all want to dream in that time, okay. But the prime minister is in the reality. He's dealing with the shortage of masks, shortage of tests, shortage of everything that we face. And what we see is that the state is really, that's one of the very first times in our history that we realize that the state can't help anyone, can't help us anymore for any problem that we might have. We have to rely on ourselves.
Jacques-Marie Le Sien, the first speech that Emmanuel Macron gives at the beginning of the pandemic, he talks about it being a war. By the time that he'd made his fourth speech, he's made 4 big addresses on national television, he'd shied away from that. He'd changed his tack. He no longer was talking in those terms. You agree with Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet that it is an unprecedented pandemic, and he perhaps could have chosen his language differently at the outset?
It's difficult. I think that at first, the president wanted to mobilize the whole country to fight against the pandemic. So when you want to mobilize, mobilization is the first step before the declaration of war. So there is a link. We were at war against the virus. Maybe he should not have chosen that kind of word, because war has plenty of other understandings. But at the beginning, I think it was the right way to mobilize the country, especially to prevent people from walking in the streets and everywhere else. And now, of course, the war is not ended, may I say, but we have to organize the plans to safeguard many economic sectors, and also to stimulate the economy. One point is, you mentioned the difference between the president and the prime minister. It's not only a question of individuals, it's also institutional. From the very beginning in the constitution, the government is responsible to determine and conduct the policy of the nation. And the president is not just above the party, is seen as a referee above everything. So the president,
come on, that's how it's set up. That's how it's set on paper. That's how it's set on paper, Jacques-Marie Le Sien. But we all know that the decisions are made, as the French say, au château, at the Élysée Palace.
Yes, but the challenge is that look at the way things are implemented. The one who has to explain and detail the plan, the procedures, the protocols, and all the implementation plan for all the sectors, health, education, and economy, is the prime minister. It's not the job of the president. So the challenge for the president is to remain in charge of, while it is the prime minister's job and responsibility to give all the details. And the challenge is, if the prime minister is implementing in details, he has to explain this on TV and on the media, which then is preventing the president to speak. So this is a difficult balance to manage between the president and the prime minister. One is giving the direction, the trends, and the other one is just implementing.
Julian Jackson, General de Gaulle was a 2-term French president, but he was only elected in universal suffrage once. If you go down the list of all the past French presidents since 1958, none has been re-elected with a sitting majority. The only two who've won re-election after de Gaulle did so in that period of what they call cohabitation. That is to say, they had a parliamentary minority behind them. They didn't have, the prime minister was from the opposition. So could Emmanuel Macron buck that trend, or is it mission impossible getting re-elected as president in France?
Well, I have to say, of course, you shouldn't ask a historian to talk about the future. Every prediction I ever make about the future always turns out to be wrong. But your point is absolutely right, except for de Gaulle, and it was a slightly different situation. None, and except for the case of Mitterrand Chirac, in exceptional circumstances, no one has been re-elected. Will he or won't he? I suppose my answer is that he will. Well, I just like to say one thing. I actually think that his gestion, his management of the crisis has been much better than most of people have been implying today. He had to find a rhetorical tone as president. He couldn't not speak. He didn't get it quite right at the beginning, but I thought his last speech, he had adapted his tone. If I compare it to the completely shambolic performance of my own government in my own country, I think actually he's managed things quite well. Will he be re-elected? I think the question is, what would the alternative be? And if there's an alternative, I'm afraid the alternative almost certainly will be the Rassemblement National, as it now calls itself, the old Front National. And so I think that the chances of his being re-elected are high, not because people love him, not because people think he's doing a wonderful job, but because they see him as a kind of barrage against something that would be worse. But we are living in a very, very unprecedented, as has been said, situation. And so I can't be sure. But if I was putting money on it, I would put money on re-election for the reason I just said.
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, as a political and communication strategist, the thought that you now have this president who's faced with a fragmentation of his majority, could that in fact serve his purposes in painting himself as an outsider come that election in 2 years' time?
Well, it's yes, maybe it could. And the fact is, he was elected in 2017 with 24% of the votes in the first round of the election. The second round was won against Marine Le Pen, and the assumption is generally that any candidate that would be ahead of the others in the first round and would face Marine Le Pen in the second round would be elected. So it could be re-elected on that basis. It's probably what he will be looking for. I think he will try more and more to be in a fight with Marine Le Pen, an exclusive fight. And maybe it could help that he would lose ground in some sections of the electorate. I don't know. I think it's so far from his preoccupations, what should be his preoccupations now, that it's ludicrous to think about this election. Anyone now, even Didier Raoult, could pretend to be the next president. The situation is so volatile.
The Marseille hydrochloroquine,
the guy, yeah, our own version, local version of the the shaman, the magician that could cure the virus instantly. We are looking. Every country is looking for that kind of a guy, and we have our own guy, the chloroquine guy, and he's starting to be in politics. He's joined a movement that is led by Michel Onfray, who is very much on the right now. And this movement could lead this kind of guy, who is indeed very popular in France, to be the next president, because the reality is it's so volatile. The political class has been so attacked during this crisis, and deeply attacked, that anything could happen. And the majority you need to be elected is really thin nowadays. If you face Marine Le Pen on the second round of the election, Didier Raoult could be the next president for all I know. So I'm not an historian. Maybe I can talk about the future, but this could be a possible future. We are not that far from the UK, and Boris Johnson has not been elected because the British guys are dumb. He's been elected because he knows how to be elected.
Right. We'll shy away then, just because we're almost out of time from looking too much into a crystal ball. Sabine Tillet, in the context of the current crisis, let's talk about the present to finish. Should we be hearing more from the president? Should he be speaking more to reporters? Should he be giving more speeches? Or do you like the way that the crisis is being managed?
I think you underlined we are facing an unprecedented crisis, and I think it's really difficult to take the right reason. What are the right reasons? We will see it after. And I think now, but we have to, I think we have to, we have a really institutional problem because you said some minutes before we was elected with not only the president but also the parliamentarians with between 25 to 30% of electors. It's really difficult to reform the country, to take the decisions, to agree all with the majority of electors. And I wish in the future that we change a little bit our system, which perhaps for the election a little bit more proportional,
more proportional representation. Jacques-Marie Le Sion, we're out of time. Just in yes or no, would you agree to have when it's all over, a big reckoning when it comes to how the institutions work, particularly when it came to the public health response?
The challenge for us now is to be sure that we are making the right choices in a sort of economic stimulus plan, and the institution could not be changed in the next two years. I was just to highlight the fact that there is no alternative. There is no credible alternative. When people are asked, do you believe that someone else could have done better than Emmanuel Macron or Edouard Philippe? The highest level is 20% for Mrs. Le Pen, and all the others are below. So it means nobody is believed to be able to run the country better. It may change in the next 2 years, but so far I am still confident that all together with the new group, with the Modem, with Agir and En Marche, we are able to give a stability in the parliament to implement what is necessary and what must be done. That's the way it will work in the next two years.
A lot of work ahead. I want to thank you, Jacques-Marie Le Sion, for joining us. I want to thank as well Sabine Tillier. I want to thank Julian Jackson for being with us from Nîmes in the south of France, and from the heights of Megève, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet. We want to thank you as well for joining us in ever greater numbers on Facebook and on our YouTube channel, and of course on France24.com. Bye for now.